Service in the armed forces is a profound and interesting experience. The Jewish War Veterans Oral History Project is our opportunity to share stories of that experience with the families of the veterans and with the community at large. Whether during times of war and combat or during times of preparedness and peace, the retired men and women that make up North Shore Post 29 of the Jewish War Veterans have courageously served our country in various ways. These are their stories. Hello, I'm Bill Harris. I'm a member of the Jewish War Veterans of the United States of America, North Shore Post 29, and a resident of Highland Park. With me today is Howard Cain, also a member of Post 29 of JWV, and also a resident of Highland Park. This is the 31st in a series of JWV veterans in our post telling their personal stories of their military service for the benefit of their families and the community. Howard was a flight engineer on B-29 bombers in the Pacific at the end of World War II. And Howard, let's get started. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born on November 1st, 1926 in Chicago. That would make me 90 years old. Just celebrated my birthday several months ago. At an early age, I think less than a year old, my family moved to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, which is a little north of Milwaukee and right on the foot of Lake Winnebago. And we lived in Fond du Lac until I was about 7.
What did your family consist of? What did you do in Wisconsin?
My mother and father were both Russian immigrants. They came over as children. I'm quite sure it was probably an arranged marriage. I had an older brother who was about 6 years old and now passed on, but 6 years older than I. And my father worked for his brother-in-law in a food distributing business. He was a salesman. And if there's one thing I remember about Fond du Lac is that we had a little Plymouth coupe, my dad did, with a rumble seat.
Something
you never see anymore.
You may have to describe what that is. They're not too familiar anymore.
No. But that was life in Fond du Lac. We spoke mostly Yiddish at home, a little Russian, and I guess till I got to kindergarten, that's where I honed my English language.
My goodness. So you said until the age of 7. What happened then at age 7?
Age 7, we moved to Chicago. My father opened up his own business. He opened up a mattress factory. Make them in the back, sell them in the front. We moved to the south side of Chicago, not Hyde Park, not South Shore, but a section called Englewood.
Englewood, which unfortunately is rather
pretty tough today.
Pretty tough today and in the news frequently, but for the wrong reasons. Well, tell me about it. So now you're 7 years old. I assume you joined everybody else in the Chicago public school system?
Absolutely right. Went to a school called grammar school called Lewis Champlin. And Lewis Champlin was adjacent to Englewood High School, which I'm not sure exists today. For pastime, the Englewood YMCA was where we spent most of our time, where we learned to play basketball, where we learned to play baseball, we learned to swim. And that in the schoolyard. I don't know if kids play in the schoolyard anymore, but we always had a choose-up baseball game in the schoolyard.
Yeah, that's a history of a lot of young kids. Sports was a big deal in Chicago then, and to a large extent it is now. Well, when you went to elementary school, obviously you went on to high school. Why don't you tell me a little bit about Howard at high school?
Well, that was a great time of my life, at least as I think back. Moved in the mattress factory again from 63rd Street to 71st Street, and I enrolled in a school called Parker High School.
Parker High School.
I'm not sure Parker still exists, but at the time it was at 67th and Stewart, very large campus, Chicago Teachers College.
We have a picture of Parker High School. And
fond memories. And I never did ditch.
This came from a yearbook about a year or two ahead of you, but that's contemporary type of picture.
Yeah,
And you're right. It was from what I learned about it. It was a
like
very large campus.
It was like a college campus, Wilson Junior College. In those days, maybe there still is, a series of two-year junior colleges in Chicago. There was Cain, there was Herzl, there was Wilson. My memory doesn't serve me, but there were 4 or 5 junior colleges.
Sure.
That was on campus. Chicago Teachers College was also on campus, and as I recall, to be a teacher in the Chicago Public School District, you had to go to CTC. And there was also Parker Grammar School, so we were quite a campus.
It sounds like it. Well, tell me a little bit about what kind of student. What did you do in high school?
Well, I was a grinder. I was a good student. I made National Honor Society, but I played basketball, believe it or not. In those days, every public high school fielded 2 teams. One was called Lights or Juniors. The other was called Heavies or Seniors. And it was by height. If you were 5'7" or under, you played junior or lightweights. If you were 5'7" and a quarter and over, you played seniors. And I played on the Parker Lights for 3 years. And my last year, we beat the famous Marshall team, Marshall Lights, who had won 99 straight. I did not start. I was not a starter, but we beat them at St. Sabina's gym, and that was our claim to fame. We were the city champs.
I'll say, yeah, in the city the size of Chicago, that's really a big deal. Well, how about classes? What kind of classes did you enjoy, and what kind of student were you?
I was a grinder. I made National Honor Society. Math was not my long suit, but and I used to say I could never be a doctor because I used to faint in health class. Did not like the sight of blood, but I was a good student, very creative, good writing abilities. But at that time, and this was from 1941 to 1944, World War II was raging, and we all knew that eventually we were going to go into service, and no one really thought about college or beyond what branch of service am I going to go into.
Yes, well, so you were in high school basically from
1941
to
through 44.
44.
Yeah.
How about your brother Norman? What was he doing?
Well, Norman was about 5-6 years older than I, and he went into the service, into the Army, I'm guessing about 1942, 1943. And he went overseas, and he was in Europe, and he was, not sure, I don't think he was in the infantry, but something affiliated to. And
the ground forces.
He was in the ground forces, and maybe in some administrative job, I'm not quite sure, but an enlisted man, but long gone.
So you graduated in 1944, and
right.
The war is still raging, obviously.
The war is still raging, and we all knew, in high school, we had this, I don't know, call it devil may care attitude that out of high school we were going to all go to the draft board. And when you're 18, you went to the draft board, and by and large, it was going to be the infantry.
I say, well, you decided then at 17 to do it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
What happened?
Back then when you were 17, back way then when you were 17, you could enlist in any branch of service that was, of your preference. You could go Navy, go Army Air Corps, Coast Guard, or Marines, if you had parental approval. And I guess Hollywood got to me, and I just loved all the movies about the Air Corps. I loved what they called the 50 mission crush hats that they wore. And so I thought I wanted to fly. I wanted to look like them. I wanted to be like them. So it was the Army Air Corps. My best friend and I went down to the recruiting station downtown. We were both 17. And we enlisted in what was called the cadet program, and that's what you entered in the Army Air Corps. Either be a pilot, a navigator, bombardier,
right, an
whatever.
officer kind of program.
Officer, a flight officer of some kind.
Well, your parents obviously gave you permission. What happened?
No. When I discussed it with my mother and dad, my brother being overseas, uh, they told me in their broken English and in Yiddish exactly no in no uncertain terms. I took the bull by the horns and I signed my mother's name with my left hand, my father's name with my right hand on the recruitment papers and took them back downtown and enlisted.
Forgery, age 17.
At age 17.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, before we start talking about you, actually after you were called up, you also had quite a few jobs while you were still in high school and so forth, including some pretty unusual ones. You want to tell me about them?
Well, let's see. One year when there was still a Union stockyards in Chicago, I used to pen, it was called penning cattle. One of my best friend's dad was a commission man, and he would bring cattle in from various farms, and then he would auction them off or sell them off. And the cattle, the bulls, the cows, the steers had to go from one pen to another, and we would chase them. And I remember this one day, there was a bull, and they said, Cain, your job is to move that bull from here to there. You got to be kidding. But got it done. One year I was a carpenter's helper. Another year I worked for Klein Potato Chip Company, just hefting big bags of potatoes. And another year, a bunch of us from the high school worked for a trucking company, just unloading and loading trucks. And I remember whenever we got hungry and there was a box of food that we were shipping, somebody would accidentally drop the box.
It would accidentally
open up, and we accidentally ate it.
Yeah. Well, sounds like, again, interesting jobs and fun. But now you've enlisted, and how did you get called up? Was it almost immediately?
Yeah, not too far after 1944, I went in and got my notice, and I was to report to Fort Sheridan.
Yeah, right up the road.
Right up the road. Never knew I'd end up living, when I first got married in the Highlands, about 2 minutes from Fort Sheridan. But had to report to Fort Sheridan where they did, the indoctrination, the shots. I guess I got a uniform there, as I remember. And within 2 days, on a train heading south to Keesler Field in Biloxi, Mississippi.
That's right on the Gulf Coast?
Right on the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, well, that's for a Chicago boy, even though you had grown up a little bit in Wisconsin, that must have been a little bit of a change, especially since this was summer. What did you find Keesler like?
Well, the whole experience was sort of culture shock. You're taking a 17-year-old kid, and suddenly someone's poking you in the back, and because you didn't have your hair combed properly or at the proper length. At first, I'm not quite sure how I reacted, but Keesler Field itself was typical basic training, I'm sure not infantry basic training, but we did our share of marching. We did our share of long hikes, bivouac out in what today I think might have been a swamp, but up early, the usual routine that anybody who was ever in service, went through. And that was, the basics of basic training.
Yeah, we have a picture up now. That's actually from 1945. It's sort of off by a month or two, but that's the actual reception center where people report in before they're distributed. It was called the personnel office. And I assume you were in that building at least for a very short time.
It does not look familiar, but it's a long time ago, as I say, 90 today, 17 then.
Did they give you any weapons training? What was the basic training like besides the marching and the calisthenics?
I remember the firing line. We trained with a carbine, which I loved. It was a nice weapon to shoot. I trained with something called a grease gun, which was
what is that?
It was like a machine gun. It was an automatic where the stock pulled out, and rapid fire. And lastly, we trained with a 45. And as an aside, when I got overseas, and I think they gave me a 45 shoulder holster, and I never took it out of Cosmoline. And they said, well, why? And I said, because I would do more damage throwing it. Every time I'd aim it, I could not.
It's famous for having quite a kick.
Yeah.
I remember having to shoot.
So I said, if I have to shoot somebody with it, I'll throw it at them.
Or at least get a messy with the Cosmoline, right? Well, so you went through basic training there, including spending a little bit of time out in the Mississippi swamps and so forth. At the end of basic training, at this point, you still had hopes of going to pilot school or pilot training?
We took the tests. I forgot if they were called Stay-9 tests. Why that sticks in my head. It was math, and then there was depth perception. All kinds of physical, mental, and at that point in time, the war was really winding down. War with Europe was just about over, or was over. And they had pilots, and as clerk typists, they had so many of them. So they sent us, we were called squadrons in basic training. Then my whole squadron went to something called Aircraft Engine Mechanic Advanced School.
So yes, to learn technical.
To learn the technical
aspects
aspects of mechanics and the workings of an airplane and how to service an airplane.
Where was that school?
Yeah, it was at Keesler Field.
Oh, so you stayed at Keesler.
I stayed at Keesler for that.
We have a good picture. This actually is from a postcard you could buy at the Base Exchange, or PX, I guess they called it in the Army. And this shows a number of students. I'm not sure exactly, but it looks like a crankshaft and maybe a supercharger. Was this typical of the kind of training you got?
Yeah, that's exactly that. And I remember one day I was working on some kind of a hydraulic system, trying to hook it up so the flaps and everything would work, learning. And threw the switch and all the lights went off. I had the electrical and the hydraulic. It took time, but we learned.
Yeah. Was it training on a specific type of airplane or airplanes in general?
Airplanes in general.
Yeah, and internal
combustion. Some were radial, and some were inline. But we did it all.
Well, you had mentioned Keesler when you went down there by train that it's near Biloxi. Did you, while you were in training, did you have a chance to get any liberty or get to see Biloxi?
Not while you were in basic. Basic was pretty well grunt. It was you did whatever. And finally, when we broke basic, when it was over, I think it was 8 weeks, 12 weeks. Could have been 12. Finally, we get our first pass to go to Biloxi, Mississippi, and and then you had the squadron. I remember this. I do remember. We were getting our first pass, and the squadron barracks has to pass inspection, and some gunny sergeant walks in and he looks, and somebody's bed was not made. No passes for anybody.
We have a picture up right now of you and
oh my God.
I'm not sure
who
the friend was, but this is, it says Keesler and Biloxi there.
Yeah, so, that was our first pass into Keesler, into Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yeah, you're looking pretty snappy there. And understand you had some friends nearby from high school and so forth. We have another picture. Tell us about this.
Those are we were the Three Musketeers in high school. I'm in the middle. I'm still in basic training, and as a result, I'm in my fatigues, as you can see. The gentleman on my right is Bob Bay, great pal. He was in the Navy, and he was stationed at Gulfport, which is down
Other
the road.
side of
Just down,
Biloxi, yeah, down
the
the
other
road,
side
yeah.
of Biloxi. I don't know if it was a Seabees. I'm not quite
It
sure.
was where CB training was
Yeah,
done.
it would,
Yeah, construction battalion people.
But he obviously had leave, and he came down to visit us. And to my right is my good pal Paul Elias, my best friend. We were like brothers, and it was Paul and I who enlisted together. And he's now done with basic, and you can see he's all dressed for a pass.
Dressed for a pass
Got
and ready to go.
Got a cigarette in his left hand. I can see that,
That's a great picture, and that's
yeah.
in front of
That's from
your
one of the
barracks or
barracks,
somebody's
yeah,
barracks,
yeah, right.
at Keesler. Well, at this point in your training, the war in Europe's
Over, yeah.
it's over, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's over.
So what's the focus is shifted considerably.
The focus is now Japan, and the Pacific, and where are we going, and how are we going to get there, or are we going to get discharged? No one quite knew, but we knew. But the story was that look, God knows how long the war with Japan is going to continue. They're not showing no signs of capitulating or surrendering. So life went on in the military.
Yeah, some of the island battles in early in spring of '44 were fierce.
Saipan, Tinian,
especially
Guadalcanal, and ultimately where I ended up, Okinawa, which was the worst.
Well, after you finished, understand you had a chance to go back to Chicago and Wisconsin briefly before you were shipped overseas, and that was a chance to see the family again. And
saw the family again, and again, my brother, I think at this point, was home, so we had a chance to get together.
Yeah, we
shortly.
have a picture of the two of you. There it is.
Yeah. There you can see on his left sleeve at the bottom there are 3 bars, or three stripes.
Right.
And that each stripe means 6 months overseas.
And
so he was overseas for a year and a half. I can't read his campaign ribbons; they're across.
I'm not sure either, but obviously he was among the first to come back to the States, and because of his long service in Europe.
Yeah, and I'm heading over.
Yeah, and
a long time ago.
My
my brother died. My
picture.
brother died about. Well, if he were alive, he'd be 96 or 7.
Well, I'm sorry.
Lovely picture.
Yeah. Well, from there, you were going to be sent to the Pacific, and what was the transportation arrangements? How did you get there eventually?
Well, I wasn't sure where I was going, to tell you the truth. My good friend Paulie last night, we were both at Truex. We both completed our training, and they sent us to Truex. And one day, we get up, and they line us up. They call names. You're in this line. You're in this line. Paul was in this line. I was in that line. And I went south, and he went north, whatever. And I ended up in San Francisco on a troop train to San Francisco. Had no idea, absolutely no idea where Paul is. And that's another story, and I'll get to that later.
Okay. Okay, so now you're on the West Coast.
Now I'm on the West Coast in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And on a troop ship, and we go out underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and I am one seasick little guy. I can remember laying there over the rail.
Yeah, we have actually I found on the internet a picture of the Army transport Edelin.
The USS Edelin.
And that ship had quite a history. It was actually built before World War I and was a troop ship all through the First World War and the Second World War. So by the end of the Second World War, it was probably a pretty tired old ship.
Oh God, and I remember how we slept. There were, as a Navy man, you would know there. What would you call them? Hammocks.
Hammocks, yeah.
There would be
racks,
or racks. There were 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
And and somebody was in each one. And if you got like number 2 or 3, and there was somebody big above you, you know,
They
sort of
definitely sag.
it definitely sagged, and it was a rough 21 days. But we did stop in Honolulu for a day or maybe 2, and they let us off. And but ultimately, when we got to Okinawa, there was no pier, no dock. We all had to climb down landing nets.
Oh, like an
Well,
invasion.
you know, like
yeah.
an invasion. I said, with a pack on your back. I thought to myself, what? I'm not in the infantry. I'm supposed to be flying. But there we were. Finally.
Judging from the picture we just saw, that's about a good 40, 45 feet.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you haven't practiced that, that's
You know,
probably
it was all new to me.
yeah, quite a surprising enterprise. Well, right. So now you're on Okinawa. You've got all your gear in a pack, or maybe you had a duffel also. But where did you go from there?
Well, you went to some kind of a staging area, as I remember. They called out names, and somewhat this way, somewhat that way. And when they called me, got in there's a truck. There was about 6 of us, and we were assigned to what was called then the 460th Bomb Squadron, 333rd Bomb Group at Kadena, which was a B-29 group.
Yeah, we have a picture of your squadron's emblem.
There's
yeah.
the 460th
That's
bomb emblem.
fierce-looking elephant there.
Yeah, well, B-29 was the biggest. Remember at that point it was the biggest bomber we had.
Absolutely.
Most people don't know that the B-29 originally was designed by Boeing to go into Europe, to action in Europe, but when the war ended so quickly in Europe, it never saw action in Europe.
Sure.
Just in the.
Well, the battle for Okinawa had been in May, I think. So you were really there just
After,
a month or 2 after that.
After the battle, and the 460th, we were part of Far Eastern Air Forces, FEEF, and the emblem on my hat is the FEEF emblem, and it's the if you know your astronomy, it's the Southern Cross.
The Southern Cross, yeah.
And Southern Cross is the largest constellation of stars in the Southern Hemisphere. And this I know is that it is part of the Australian flag.
It is, yeah.
And how it got adopted to be FEEF for Far Eastern Air Forces, I suppose Far Eastern, but that to me that was always interesting that
That's
the Southern Cross was the emblem that I wore.
Yeah, it does seem strange because Okinawa is well above the equator, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're there. Understand there were quite a few rules about what you could and couldn't do there in Okinawa so soon after the end of the battle for Okinawa.
Yeah, we were warned. Do not go into caves. And Okinawa was loaded with caves. I imagine not like, I think it was Iwo Jima that had the caves, if I remember the movie. And they said, you don't know, who's holed up. They just didn't know. They said, don't go in. And you don't wander off into any fields because there are still, they're mined, and we haven't
They haven't
dug them out yet. They haven't
yeah.
found them all. So be careful. If you see a sign that says "Do not enter," do not enter.
Do not enter. I can imagine. Well, what was living like? Obviously, you said there were no piers, no facilities.
No.
So Kadena was.
Kadena was a B-29 group. Somewhere nearby, I know there was Yantan, which I think was a Marine base, night fighter. I think the Marines flew the Black Widow because I remember seeing them come over. But living was we lived in tents, and I guess the famous typhoon that hit blew everything away. But I remember we had what we all called super sacks, and we would take lumber and build a frame for a bed, and then cut up an inner tube for a spring, and then put your sleeping bag on top of that, and then put nets over that, and then hang your shoes on the top. Always
What
had
was
usually
that?
scorpions or whatever, whatever is crawling. So the first thing you did every morning is when you got up, you got your shoes and went outside and you shook.
We have a picture of you doing part of your morning routine. What's going on here?
That's, we didn't have hot and cold running water. And that is a water tank. And I'm shaving, obviously. And I guess we would heat, you'd have to heat the water. And I forgot how I did it, but I did it. And the water was in my helmet.
Oh, so you'd fill your helmet?
You fill your helmet with the water, and that's you shaved
Wow.
out.
Yeah. So it's pretty.
I don't even know if I was old enough to have a beard.
But very, very definitely rustic living.
Yeah, it was rustic living.
So you were there, I understand, and at that point, where you're still on Okinawa, the atomic bombs were dropped, or what happened?
No, the bombs were. I got there right after the bombs.
Right after. So that would have been
the bombs were dropped
late August, early September.
The bombs were. Well, they say atomic, and if I'm right, the first bomb, which was called, I think, Little Boy, was the nickname for that bomb. Colonel Tibbets flew the plane of 20th Air Force off of Tinian. And the name of that B-29 was called the Enola Gay, and every pilot named his own aircraft for the most part. And the Enola Gay was the name of his mother. That was his mother's name. And that was an atom bomb. Now, 4 days later, when they went to Nagasaki, the name of the aircraft was Boxcar. Most people don't even know. It's a great trivia question. What's this? And that was called Fat Man. And I think that may have been either a hydrogen bomb or a plutonium bomb. Now, I suppose they're both nuclear in the sense they're nuclear, but...
they were both devastating.
They were both devastating.
Yeah. Well, at this point then, shortly after that, there was a surrender ceremony and so forth.
That was in Tokyo Harbor.
Right.
But I don't know how many months later, we flew a photo reconnaissance mission over both Hiroshima.
Yeah, we have a good picture of you ready to fly.
No,
and this is an exceptionally good picture.
That's right outside of our tent.
What does that say there?
Mournful Manor.
The name of
I didn't
airplane?
name it. But that's, getting ready to fly, earphones on, looking very Hollywood there with the white scarf.
Oh, yeah. It looked like it. And here again...
there's just 3 of us outside of, I don't know where, and I'm awfully skinny there. I had a bout with something. I don't know if it was mononucleosis or what, and that could have been when I came back, but God, if I only look like that today.
I understand. Well, what were your duties in the squadron, and did you get a chance to fly?
We would fly as they trained us that as a flight engineer. We would fly occasionally, enough for everybody to get their flight time in.
Their proficiency time.
Yeah, and the pilots, interestingly enough, they fought not to fly their B-29, but there was a little hot little plane. Oh God, there I am calling up with that's me on the right.
Yeah.
We're calling up an engine doing some kind of repair.
Yeah, that's a B-29 there, judging from the propeller and the big cowling,
And I can remember we were doing a compression check one day, and the worst thing you could do on a cylinder, the worst thing you wanted to do if you couldn't get the compression up was change the cylinder. Be easier to change the entire engine.
Exactly. That's even on an automobile, you don't want to have to get that deep into the system.
So I can remember yelling at somebody, "Get me a ball peen hammer." It's got the plastic end of it.
Yeah.
So up it comes, I catch it, and I said, "Okay, pull it." Bang, bang, bang. Rack, the rocker arm a few times. I said, okay, pull it through. I got to screw it in. Okay, we got compression.
Well, that was all that mechanics training,
Yeah.
right? The gentle application
Scary.
of the hammer. Right?
Yeah.
Well, you did get up quite a bit and were a qualified flight engineer, so
Yeah.
you made a lot of the flight trips. We have a good picture of what a flight engineer does. This is
That's the panel.
the panel. Talk about it a little bit. What's
Well, there is fuel, fuel mixtures, starter, the superchargers, all the gauges, oil pressure. You're reading them all.
hydraulics, everything, and you
The
have
hydraulics, you name it.
you can both monitor them and control them.
And control them, and a little putt-putt in the back, which you had to start first. And I digress. Well, when we get to, if you've got a picture of Fifi, I'll tell you the last time I sat in that seat was about 2 years ago, and it's an interesting story.
Understand. So this was the B-29 is a very, very sophisticated plane.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it. And we also have a picture of one, a very specific one called Fifi.
Yeah, that's the one I sat in. The B-29 was developed by Boeing, and it was the first totally, when I say totally, pressurized airplane. We theoretically did not have to wear oxygen. They could go up to 25,000, 30,000 feet. There was a long tunnel that started right behind, almost directly behind where I sat, to lead to the back. And to get to the back, you had to go through the tunnel where the gutters.
A walking tunnel or a
No,
crawling
no,
tunnel?
crawl.
Oh, crawling.
Crawl.
Yeah. Wow.
And another thing about the B-29 is that it had what we call remote control. I called it remote control gunnery. And I called the gunners, some called them scanners. And the gun mounts were on the top and on the bottom. And the scanners had this, mechanism where they would just turn as the incoming fighters, and
the guns would then track it like that.
And rather than all the movies where you saw where the gunners are in an open window, banging away. It was the only one, as a matter of fact, on the 29 was the rear gunner who had.
He had direct control of his gun.
Yeah.
Well, again, we had the picture of Fifi up a minute ago. Why don't you tell us a little about this particular plane?
Well, Fifi is the only B-29 still flying, and it is based out of I want to say Dallas, Texas, just right outside of Dallas. It is not owned or controlled by the military. There's a group of individuals who, I guess it's for profit because they have put it back together. None of the current crew are military. I mean, some ex-military, but and they fly it around the country to different air museums. They get to see only one flying today, and they show it, and they charge you to go up for a ride. It was $1,000 to ride up front, and $500 to ride in the back, as I recall. And it was at the Palm Springs Air Museum where I lived, and was a docent. So they asked me if I would like to go up for a ride because I was the only B-29 guy who was a docent who was still there. And I said, I said, why do you think I'm going to pay you $500 or $1,000 to ride on an airplane that you paid me to ride? I said, no, thanks. But the pilot said, come on, I'm going to take you inside. Would you like to go in? So we go in. I'm in the cockpit, and he said, why don't you jump in your seat? And I did. He said, close your eyes. I did. And he moved my hand. He said, where's your hand? I said, throttles. Moved my hand again. He says, where's your hand? I said, fuel. Moved my hand again. He says, where's your hand? I said, booster pumps. He says, nice going. You just feathered all 4 engines. And he said, you just shut down all 4 engines. So
goodness.
so I looked at him, I said, sir, you got to cut me some slack. I said, the last time I sat in this seat was 1946.
Yeah.
I said, it's a long time ago, but it was fun. It was great just to, and I do remember the first time I sat in that seat as flight engineer, the co-pilot turned to me, or the pilot turned to me, the old man, he had to be all at 22, and he said, engineer, do you have a hammer? I said, no, go get one. Go get one. And I said, hammer, sir. He turns to the co-pilot. He said, if this guy reaches for anything, hit him in the hand with the hammer.
Oh my goodness.
2 great pals.
Well, we get back to Okinawa. You ended up, like you said earlier, making some very important photographic flights.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Well, we did atom bombs. The big bombs were dropped in August. Hiroshima first, Nagasaki. 3, 4, 5 days later, the war ended. I'm trying to remember if this was September, if this was October. I just don't remember. But
Relatively shortly after.
Yeah, a relatively short period of time afterwards. We flew a photo recon mission over both cities, and we came in, rather low. We had a cameraman on board, and I don't know, it was 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet, whatever it was. But as we got over both cities, I jumped out of my seat and I dove into the front window with the bombardier, so I could really, because I had no window. The only window I had was up there, yeah. And so I could, get a look-see.
We have a ground level picture of Nagasaki. This was actually taken by one of the other members of JWV Post 29 who was there at the time, a young Navy officer. But compared to other bombs, there was nothing to compare to it. No. As you could see, everything was leveled for miles and miles.
Someone said, what did it look like? And I said, well, to me, I said, if you remember the old kitchen matches that were, the long kitchen matches that every house had, and if you put them all together, like into a frame of something, it lit them and they all burned and collapsed. I said, that it just shook me. It still does. I still have a difficult time describing what I saw, and I think what we and the other nations are capable of today in the way of destructive powers. Yeah. I think there was once a play called "Stop the World, I Want to Get Off," and there are times exactly the way I feel.
I certainly can imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, in late '46, you were sent from Okinawa back to the States. You want to tell us a little bit about the trip and what happened?
Well, let me just go back one point. We had after we came back from that flight over the target cities. Somehow each one of us got a set of pictures. I don't know who arranged for it, but we each had a set of pictures. And the next day, 2 of the biggest MPs I ever saw walked in our tent and said, we want those pictures. They are not for publication, and now. And there was an officer with them, and they made it very clear we all
gave up your copies of the photos.
Our copies of the pictures. We went home very suddenly. I forgot what it was. In the fall of 46, I guess, and we got out of troop ship, and like we had one day to pack, and next thing I know, 21 days later, or whatever it was, we're in Seattle, Washington.
And you made a phone call.
Made a phone call, and in those days, everybody in Chicago, your phone number started with an exchange. It was either Englewood something, or South Shore something, or Rogers Park something, wherever you lived. and you had, it was just 4 letters. It was Englewood 6943 or whatever the heck your phone number was. But it was the exchange in 4 letters. So we queue up and I put my dime or nickel and dial O, collect call, long distance collect call, gave my phone number back home, and to anybody who answers. And my dad, answers the phone, hello, and I explained that he got a collect call from me. Would I accept charges? Would he accept the charges? And I can remember to this day, he says, you call Collect Okinawa, hang up, bang.
He thought you were still there.
And so I had to call again, I'm screaming, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home.
Well, moving forward, you came back to the States, you had access to the GI Bill, and how did you use that?
God bless, the GI Bill was one of the really great things that not just happened to me, but to so many of us who would never, ever had a chance to have gone on higher education. I went to, well, originally I wanted to go to the University of Wisconsin, being Fond du Lac. All my family up there in Wisconsin had gone there. But they said no because they had all the returning veterans they could handle. You know, so short of that, I went to Northwestern, and what Northwestern had done is taken their Chicago Avenue campus, which was Abbott Hall, Wiebold Hall, and turned it into a school of business for veterans only. It was a fast track.
And
So
what did you
I lived,
study?
you know, a total business curriculum, majored in marketing and advertising, and lived at home. Took the the elevated streetcar, whatever, buses every day. Sometimes you'd get home 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. So it was not the glamorous campus life of sorority, fraternity, or anything like that. This was, a lot of us, not me, but a lot of them were married, and it was all business.
Yeah. Well, I understand you did very well there, and
Yeah.
were able to get a job right out of school. Where did you end up working when you graduated?
Well, I was an advertising major, marketing major advertising, and my first job was for a very small advertising agency, and I started out in the mailroom. And I thought, here I am overseas,